Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to all three and Bristol University in allowing me this opportunity to be able to speak today. I think it's such an important matter that we're talking about, and it's raised at a level where there's people from different organisations, different institutions who are here today to listen to some of the work that I've been going through and some of the challenges I think um, being a community engagement lead. So just to correct, not from Portsmouth, Plymouth. So it sounds the same, but I'm community engagement lead. I'm one of 4 or 5 that are dotted around North Wales, um, Bristol, Devon and Cornwall, Dorset, across that region. I sit in Plymouth predominantly and have been in post since last September. My background really has been in community engagement. What's really interesting is the level of community engagement work that I've carried out in all the different areas. So whether that be in crime, health, housing, education, and employment, and you get to see all the different areas of work those 5 remits cover. And along that way, I've come across many different situations, many different whether you group them as addictions, so whether that be drugs, alcohol, and now moving into the sector of gambling, the level of support that's out there for individuals. I think because it's a new area of work for organisations to suddenly tap into and realise how big the problem is. I think it's underestimated in terms of what people know about it, what people can do about it, and what level of expertise is out there within the community that know about it and how it can be dealt with. Some research, when I was looking at what I wanted to tap into and what I wanted to talk about and discuss really, with a wide level of people who are in attendance today, is what is on their radar, what do they know, who do they know, uh, and what would they know. So looking at research, it's really interesting. There's been a number of reports by different institutions, different organizations, different universities who've tapped into specifically going into the area around gambling with ethnic minorities. And we have to look at what I would call an up-to-date report or up-to-date reports that have surfaced on the radar now. Because if we look back pre-COVID, there were a number of reports that were out. Then once COVID had kicked in and the restrictions were there, we knew that the way people were gambling had significantly changed. Everything was far more readily available in the palm of the hand rather than people accessing, whether it was popping down to the bookies, popping down into the casino. Everybody had to be or were governed by the level of restrictions that the government put into place for people. And of course, all the organizations where, if we look at what we call the after hours of institutions, the nightclub sector suffered, the casinos suffered, but they had to pick up the baton and look at ways of recouping that loss. So the industry didn't sort of like go to sleep. They just reset their trading opportunity. Trading opportunity allowed everybody to suddenly then say, actually, we can do all of this online. And the legacy is now almost embedded in organizations. So the tradition of people going to the bookies on a Grand National Day, the tradition of people going to the casino on a Friday night or a Saturday night has suddenly changed the whole sector. There's a film that where I'm going to asked to be played. And it's a really interesting film that was put together by the Beacon Trust, who work predominantly in the north. And it's a film I think that hasn't had, or in my opinion, I think when I got involved in this sector, didn't have the airwaves that it needed to have. It didn't have the platforms that it required. Um, but it also needed to show that this was not just prevalent within the Muslim community, but in the wider community. Now, um, I come from a Sikh background, where traditionally I'll talk about sort of things where we think are what we'd class as being normalized or sort of, everyday. Um, and different cultures will have different avenues and different ways of sort of projecting a message, be that it, one of support, access to individuals, access to organizations, but also how something can be embedded within a specific culture to then be allowed to be addressed and looked at how we then tackle the issue. Where some people may say, well, we want to tackle it in such a way without treading on anybody's toes, offending anyone, the fear of saying, are we being stereotyped? So I think there's a lot of that stuff that's out there within organizations who will look at ways of thinking, how best are we placed in order to tackle that issue without those barriers in front of us? So what we'll do, we'll play the film first, and then I'll talk about. Oh, yeah, just before we start, sorry. Um, we'll play the film, and then I'm just going to talk about a study that has is out there in the open, and I'll relate back to it. And then we'll go to questions, if that's okay. Yeah.
I'm on the edge, about to fall off, and nobody knows. I'm a normal guy. You see me on the street, in the mosque, down the local shop. I blend in. I'm surrounded by friends, a loving family, a community, but no one addresses the elephant in the room. I could be your neighbor, your teacher, your sister. I'm hiding in plain sight behind a mask of Sharam. It started socially, my friends and I having a flutter. An accumulator bet was the hook that caught me. I won, and I won big. The addiction gripped me so furiously that it took over my whole life. I gambled any time, any place. No one knew. At home, at the mosque, surrounded by love, by grief. And the shurram was always there, increasing with every bet, in every lie I told. It weighed me down. It controlled me, forcing me to live two lives. I couldn't keep up with my addiction. I needed more money to feed the monster. The bets got bigger, and so did the lies. There were fake investments, payday loans, borrowed money from friends and family. And when I hit rock bottom, I sold my car, my wife's jewellery, and even my son's bike. When I couldn't access money from anywhere else and had nothing more to sell, I turned to criminal activity, stealing money from my family's business and committing fraud. I hurt so many people, I was harming myself too. The turning point in my story was when the police showed up at work, and that was it. It was out in the open. Everyone knew. I felt an enormous sense of relief, like a bird being released from a cage. But I lost my job, my wife, my home, and my izzat. I knew I had to stop. Admitting to myself that I was a gambling addict hit me with such force that it hurt. I needed to stop. I reached out to my faith leader and discovered that talking is not a weakness. My religion has shown me how delicate the soul is, and talking can make you stronger. I opened up to my friends, my family, and members of the community. Eventually, I found the Beacon Counselling Trust, and with it, professional help. It started with their free self-assessment tool. Answering a few questions helped me get the right support I needed. I went to group therapy, and it was here I found non-judgmental people who understood and cared. We talked, and talking is important for healing. Don't suffer in silence. Speak up and reach out. I'm in a good place now, getting my life back on track. I realise now that the more you suffer in isolation, the more destructive the addiction gets. But don't leave it too late like I did. Early intervention is key. Don't hide behind your shurram. Open up. Seek help. Take control. Take action.
It's really interesting because since being in post with ARA, Addiction Recovery for All, here in Bristol, I work predominantly in the Devon and Cornwall area and connecting diverse communities and those areas of work that I talked about. So, crime, health, housing, education, and employment. I'm actually security cleared now to work in the three prisons on our doorstep. So HMP Dartmoor, HMP Exeter, and HMP Channings Wood. Although there is a small number of diverse backgrounds and communities that make up the prison numbers, you have to put it into context where a number of prisoners who are from much more diverse areas are placed, or as the terminology they use, shipped out to different prisons across the southwest here. So I may connect with a number of prisoners who may be from the north, London, Birmingham, places like that. And for them, I think, and having previously worked in the criminal justice system, their first interaction of coming to a prison in the southwest, where it, on reflection, the morning after when they start seeing the staff, predominantly white. So all of a sudden, there's that huge culture shock within just the criminal justice system alone. And the reason why I'm putting that into context is in relation to people from diverse communities accessing support. Now, I'm probably one of a few people from a diverse background that actually works in the sector of um, signposting or getting people support around their gambling and gambling related harms. Um, I think when I initially spoke um, at Bristol University, I said, if people like us aren't sat at the table, then how do we know the right decisions are being made to be able to signpost people to the help and support that they need? We talk about anything that could be classed as a barrier, whether it's cultural, whether it's language, whether it's support, whether it's translation, interpretation, all those things can be. And because gambling is one of those things where people don't really need to learn to speak English in order to understand it, because we have a global phenomenon known as the internet, which means, if I can't gamble in the UK, I can gamble across Europe and across the globe. I can send money abroad to somebody and say, can you make sure you put that money on such and such? So the sector itself is a global sector. And I think it's getting to understand that actually the stuff that happens outside of the UK, which is unregulated by the industry and the sector here, means that there's a number of people in the community that would be undetected because their gambling would not connect with, say, the UK gambling institutions here. They probably would be gambling across or globally outside of the UK. So that's something that I think hasn't even been tapped into reports yet. And it's a very uncharted territory where people are looking at it and thinking, because the more number of diverse people who are coming into the UK, or those people who have settled. So this is not necessarily asylum seekers or refugees, although one of the organisations I'm working with here in Plymouth is to look at seeing where people will sort of go to as a means of, if I've got this much money, can I make more money? Can I then double that? And can I then think of it as a, not necessarily a get rich quick scheme, but as a source of income? So if I have a partner, if I have children, how do I make sure that the finance that I've got is accommodating their needs? So that's something that, if there's anybody from those organisations, I think it would be a really good conversation to look at um, the the disconnect and probably the lack of information that we have from the world of, or the community of, asylum seeker and refugees. Meanwhile, bringing it back here into the UK, I think looking at the relationship between the criminal justice system and gambling, they're two things now. When we're normally doing the presentation around Bet You Can Help, which is a 1 hour session that we provide organisations, one of the key things I do point out is that when an individual has run out of family and friends, which he or she relies upon as a source of money, the next step, as it was clearly identified in the video, is criminality. And criminality within diverse communities is getting far bigger. So prisons, I think, that are further up the line will show a difference in the number of communities where people will suddenly, within the criminal justice system, and especially here in the Southwest, if you're caught with alcohol or drugs within a prison, you can have extra days added. And having worked in the prison here in the Southwest, one prisoner said to me, he said, when we're gambling, the prison officer wants to say, "Are you winning? Are you losing?" It's almost as if that's normal, that's socially acceptable, because the way the industry has been set up to say that, it's regulated, it's over 18, it's checked, it's done, it's okay, then it's okay to do it in the prison. So there's a little bit of disparity between, how strict a prison regime can be with something that is, regulated within the system. But at the same time, you sort of think, well, drink and drugs is is not allowed within the prison system, even though we know that the drugs will get through, alcohol is being consumed. Why is it then gambling, from a criminal justice perspective, is socially acceptable? So that's a question for anybody who's from within that sector who may be attending the webinar today. Coming back to communities, I think one of the things, and again, going back to, I think from experience and knowledge of communities, where people will say, well, in the Muslim religion, it's forbidden. You're not allowed to gamble. That's one religion. Uh, from a Sikh perspective, and I think it's far easier to talk from my own opinion, whereas I don't want to sort of overall stereotype a whole community like that. I think it's far easier, from my own experience, growing up here in the UK, born and bred in Birmingham. And what used to happen, the festival of Diwali was time when everybody would go around everybody's house, have food, eat, fireworks, etc. But one house would be allocated to have a card game on the night. So sometimes when you watch these, whether you call them Bollywood or Punjabi films, traditionally you'd always see the village elders sat under a tree in the shade playing cards. You know, and you sort of you grow up seeing these images, thinking that it's traditionally normal. Within the Indian or Sikh uh, culture, um, that would be just classed as a pastime. It's only when money would start changing hands when you'd suddenly realise. I found out later on through my father that one of his relatives ended up losing the house that they had through a card game. And even back then, I mean, I'm talking. This is way before I was born, and it's one of those things you sort of like think, why would you do that? You know. But it was almost as if it was in some parts and in some places um, socially acceptable. And I think that whole thing around understanding, where it's embedded from and where it then gets played out into the mainstream, we can still see people who will gamble. Um, Currently speaking to an individual whose story is out there. He gambled £250,000 and was brought to the extent that he nearly attempted to take his life twice. But it was his family intervention that stopped that from happening. And that's how serious it can get too. And we know statistically, and I don't know what it is from an ethnic minority point of view, but you're 15 times more likely to take your own life because of a gambling related harm. And in the name of numbers, that's probably two people a day. So 700 plus people a year. And sometimes the aftermath of that really is finding out when you're arranging the paperwork. You've got to go to the banks, you've got to close accounts. You suddenly start seeing the statements, you see the transactions, you see transfer from account to account, you see all the names of the betting institutions, and that's just the ones that are regulated. That doesn't include anything that might be abroad. It's a real eye opener for those families to suddenly realise that actually now we know why the person was withdrawn, isolated, the classic signs of a person who's going through gambling related harm. Fast forward to much more diverse communities, and I think, or ethnic communities, we suddenly then realize that, it can be this mask of saying, it's okay, I'm doing everything I'm doing, but not realizing until after, which is exactly the same as it would be in, say, predominantly white communities in comparison to diverse communities. How do we then reach out to organizations? How do we reach out to faith groups in regards to doing this? Now, I'm quite innovative in the way that I reach out. I always think outside the box, and I think sometimes we end up having a one size fits all culture where we think, well, this is how we've normally done it. And one of my favorite sayings is that if we're institutionalized, one of the key things is uh, the most dangerous thing to say is we've always done it that way. And by doing that, it just means that we'll never look left or right. We just go straight ahead and we think that that is the only way forward. One of the most, well, I should say innovative, I don't want to say groundbreaking, I think it's more innovative. And what was really interesting, I was speaking to an imam from a mosque. And I said to him, I said, normally when you deliver your sermon at the end, obviously you're there to give a sense of direction, the do's and the don'ts, the rights and the wrongs. And I said, would you consider delivering a sermon around gambling? He said, why would you do that? Why would you say that? And I said, well, there's been an increase, and studies are showing that gambling in diverse communities has gone up. But what I said to him in specifically, I said, and that's diverse communities. So I'm not coming in to say to you that there's a problem within the Muslim community. What I am saying is that there's a problem within diverse communities, and that could be people from a range of different faith groups, Hindu, Sikh, Muslim, etc., etc. And I said, I'm sure there must be something, there's a sermon around, um, there'll be something around drink, drugs, and gambling. And he said, okay, what I'll do, 2 weeks prior to you coming in, I'm going to lay the foundation. So I'm going to gently introduce it into the sermon so that when the people who do come to Friday prayers, it's in their head to sort of suddenly realize I'm going to talk about something. And on the third week, so for the first 2 weeks, first two Friday prayers, the Imam spoke about gambling. And he said it was quite interesting because they were probably thinking, why all of a sudden gambling? Um, and he said that was a real eye opener. That kind of not necessarily worried him, but in the sense that they've they've taken it on board. They're now looking at it and thinking, actually, there could be an issue, there could be a problem within the community, or people we know. Because I always say when we deliver training, we always say that this isn't necessarily for the people who come to you for their support or your services. This could be within your own workplace. And I think I said it in at Bristol University, and we've been talking about the workplace charter. It, we all know someone who knows someone. It's one of those things. And then on the third week, um, the Imam led the prayers, and I was there, and we did exactly what we're doing now. We played the film, and we had a Q&A after the film was played, and I explained my role. And it was really interesting because it opened up a chapter where people suddenly realized that actually we do have a problem in the community, but we have to somehow instigate the conversation in order to address it. If we're not addressing the elephant in the room, we'll never get it sorted. And I think it made them feel far more comfortable. It was a huge step, I think, in the direction of saying that actually the Imam isn't just here to listen to or lead prayers. He's also there to support. And as the film showed, the individual went to the Imam, he went to his faith leader in order to get the support. So we have to look at ways of interacting with diverse communities. Who leads those communities? We can leave a leaflet. I think sometimes community engagement can be lazy. It's not necessarily just leaving a leaflet at the table, where when the doors open, the wind blows the leaflet away, and that's it. There's no engagement after that. It's more important to have the conversation and start the conversation with the leader, the representative, and then to take it much further and interact with the congregation. Otherwise, I think we lose the essence of why we actually are doing community engagement. Why engage with the community if you're not communicating with them? Then it doesn't become community engagement. It goes back to what most people will then turn around and say, this is just tokenistic or this is just box ticking. So there's a danger of those things happening. And I think by doing something like that, we have a different way of looking at how we actually connect with communities. So this first step, by engaging with the Muslim community, I think can be, I don't want to say a huge game changer, but I think it's a positive step in the right direction to look at that. One of the other opportunities I'm going to be doing or taking steps to do is to then go into seek places of worship. And the idea would be again to connect with them because language is one of those things where I think there's almost an assumption that everybody should know the English language. However, again, it's not printing a leaflet in so many different languages, but being able to have people who look like me, going into those communities and doing that. And some people may argue to the case where, it's far easier for me to connect with three different types of communities, being able to speak three different languages. So already I've taken that barrier and that disconnect away straight away by being able to say, actually, research is telling us that there is problem within diverse communities, and getting it across in a language that they understand. It's far more easier for them to almost have a takeaway from that, just go back and speak to their family and say, actually, somebody came in today and spoke about gambling. So we're normalizing the conversation. We're almost relocating the conversation back into the house where there may be a problem, where there could be an issue. And for that individual to suddenly realize that actually people are talking about it. So the less taboo the subject becomes, the easier it is to engage. And I think there is sometimes that fear of people sort of overstepping that mark and thinking, "Oh, I don't want to say that just in case. I don't want to do that just in case." And this is where I think community engagement teams, leads, and individuals need to, there's an element of step up and there's an element of be brave. There should be no barriers in a person thinking, I'm not too sure whether I can go into the community and see, they may be offended, uh, or they may take it wrong. The biggest the biggest tool in the toolbox really is the fact that there's research. And if we don't pick up this research and take that in and be able to use that and say, here's the research, we need to address the problem, then it's going to be an uphill struggle. And I think it's opportunities like this. There's a huge amount of research that is out there, and by using certain bits of research, the one I've used in particular is 2023. So it's post COVID, you know, and that's where it's at its peak. And even speaking in organisations within Plymouth, be they diverse and be they predominantly white communities, where if we start looking at the statistics, the national census tells us we're about 15 to 18% diverse at the moment here in Plymouth. Um, but I've been able to go into the Nepalese community, the Bangladeshi community, the Romanian community. It's been able to have the platform and big courage, conviction, and the context of the reports that tells you that these things do exist in the communities, and they have to be addressed. Um, and I think it's going to be experienced community engagement leads. I think for some new people, it's getting over that threshold, of getting in first, connecting with the hierarchy of the organization, the hierarchy of the individuals. So, it's no good speaking to the secretary of the organization when you need to speak to the chair or the president, the chairman, etc., etc. So they're the kind of things I think are based on my experience of what and where I've been doing this work so far. And organisations like HARA have given me the opportunity to be able to do that. I think an opportunity like today, connecting with people in the industry, and in that sector, is a huge step. I think this is a really good connection where your partners with Bristol University and the people who've signed up today's webinar is a really good example of saying, actually, how do we utilize the people we have in the community, but at the same time, how can we learn from individuals, bringing that out and then implementing those kind of structures like ARA. My job role wasn't really specifically to work with diverse communities, but again, going back to research, people from the armed forces and the veterans community, people from LGBTQ plus, women, and then diverse communities. They're the four areas that have seen a huge increase in gambling. Even if we look at women uh, in its own, a 38% increase, but only 1% accessing support through the National Gambling Helpline. So there's a huge mountain to climb, but again, it's tackling each thing by each sector. So when there's community engagement events that are happening within the Southwest, so even if we look at whether it's St. Paul's Carnival, whether it's the Sikh celebration of Vaisakhi, it's an opportunity for organisations like us to have a stand and a stall to promote who we are. If people see us, we know that, you know, 50,000 people would have seen the stall and would have questioned it later on in the day to say, actually, who are ARA? What do ARA do? And then it's joining up those dots, having that connection, having that communication to be able to turn around and say, yes, this is what we're going to do. So I don't know if the other areas I was going to, or I'm happy to talk about further, is around ethnic minority communities, gambling, criminal justice system, and access. So if I talk about the connection around criminal justice system, gambling, and access to support. And again, I think goes back to that statement. It would be interesting to see, I don't know how this would work, but if you took a survey of all the gambling support organisations across the country and then were to look at their diverse representation in their organisations, that would be a survey worth looking at. Because once individuals, the stigma and the shame is already associated with all people who are going through gambling related harm. But it becomes a massive barrier when you're somebody who could be from the Black or Asian community, thinking the perception is that actually someone like me doesn't gamble. The perception is that why would I need to gamble? So by having organisations that represent the areas or the the communities that they live in, I think it's important that they can make that connection. And again, it's joining those dots across that and being able to work in a way that you could say, this is our organisation, this is who we are, this is who we represent, and this is who we connect with, and this is who our partners are. So it's having a whole holistic approach um, to how individuals will work, but how individuals will also be innovative in their way at connecting with communities like such. Um, I don't want to go into too much of, I think, stereotypes. I think the biggest thing is about individuals getting support. How do we get people to the table? Maybe a lot more work now needs to be done if we start looking at gaming, the gaming industry and young people. I kind of call it the 3G or the 4G effect. So the 3Gs really is um, gaming, gambling. Sorry, yeah, it is the 3G: gaming, gambling, and grooming. So what the industry is doing now is grooming the next generation for tomorrow's gamblers, and that's from all walks of life, not necessarily from ethnic minorities. The the level of work that needs to be done at a lower level, so that early intervention, I think, whether it's in schools or whether it's in colleges, it's getting parents to understand why their child keeps taking their card and buying things and then not realizing what they're buying, those credits, those top ups, and then suddenly realizing that actually, whether you look at it as loot boxes, whether you look at it as skins, a person from, or parents from an ethnic minority background will probably have no idea of what loot boxes or skins are at all. So it's then trying to educate parents around that, because those people who are already in that system, who are buying those loot boxes, who are buying skins, who are buying those extra credits, whether it's Mario Kart, whether it's CSOG, any of those things, they technically, in my opinion, I think they are or will be tomorrow's gamblers. So already the next generation of gamblers are already in the queue, are already in the system. But how do we use that early intervention to be able to go into schools or colleges, but then also not necessarily preach to the ones who already know what those things are, but preach and then educate or raise awareness to the parents of those who are already in those educational establishments. I think that's really important because it's untapped. Nobody knows how to get into those communities, but it's just accepted that those kids are playing computer games, but not realizing the impact and the risk that's associated with those things. So that's food for thought. I think that's another conversation, but I think it's important to put that in because we may be just talking about people who are going through gambling related harm, maybe looking at an older generational number, but we've still got a new generation of people who are going through gambling harms, and that's through sports betting, which would be higher amongst the Asian community, higher probably within the black community. So sports related betting, I think, is far more greater than what we'd call the national pastime of the national lottery. You put into that account other lotteries. Scratch cards will still be prevalent there. And the way the industry is moving now, more and more, it's everything within the palm of your hand. You don't even need to leave the house. And I think COVID is responsible for that. And if there had been far more restrictions, I think whilst COVID was going on and those restrictions were in place, I think statistically we would be at a different point. But the industry was allowed to go free flow and run with it until it was ready to sort of suddenly go, actually, we should have done this, we should have done that, we should have had this in place. The aftermath suddenly, instigated and created that whole debate like that. Yeah. So I'll finish there.
Just to say thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Chaz, for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you very much.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Chaz. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.